My journey into design has been a really fun one, and it really all started from when I was a kid. I very early on was very much exposed into art. My grandfather started an ad agency back in Ahmedabad in Gujarat in India. I loved art as a kid, and so I'd go up to people in the office and be like, "What are you working on? What are you drawing? What is this thing that you call a logo?" And so that exposure to art very early on mixed with my curiosity to figure out like what is happening, what are they doing, navigated me to towards design. The way I see it is something that I've always been very mindful of or cognizant of now more than ever, especially after going through a layoff or just kind of realizing like, okay, you're cut off and now you need to move on, is to not attach my self-worth or my identity with my job, which is very important. Started to think about, what do I want next? I did see it as a really beautiful silver lining that, again, I was forced to be in this space where I need to pause and think about what matters to me. Think of it as being in a game. I bet like many of you have maybe played Age of Empires, Civilization, really anything. You're in a map, you see the map, you're in this little building, and then there are clouds all around your building. It doesn't mean the world around your little world that's visible on the map doesn't exist. It just means you need to go out and explore it so you start seeing it on the map. Try to gain that knowledge, try to open up your perspective, try to explore outside of your little zone in the map, and see what else is in these clouds. What exists, what excites you, what doesn't excite you, because knowledge is power, but knowing how to use that knowledge is truly key.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Design Head Podcast. And I hope you guys are liking all the podcasts that are coming along right now. And today we have another special guest with us, Pooja, with us. And she is a senior product designer at Lululemon. It's a very good industry. And I think she has a lot of experience to talk about in design. Let's get her on stage and let's kickstart the podcast. Hey Pooja, how are you doing?
Hey, Abhay, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty great. Okay, so let's kind of kickstart with just introduction of yours for the audience out there.
Perfect. Thanks for having me here. Really excited to chat more with you today. I'm Pooja. Like Abhay said, I'm a senior product designer at Lululemon today. My journey into design has been a really fun one. And it really all started from when I was a kid. I very early on was very much exposed into art. My grandfather started an ad agency back in Ahmedabad in Gujarat in India, and so my dad and his brothers grew up being a part of my grandfather's agency, little agency. They'd go on their bicycle and deliver things to clients. And when I grew up, I went to my dad's office and just kind of spent time there and hung out with my dad. But little did I know, it was really fascinating to see all the cool art stuff everyone was working on. And I loved art as a kid. And so I'd go up to people in the office and be like, "What are you working on? What are you drawing? What is this thing that you call a logo?" And so that exposure to art very early on mixed with my curiosity to figure out like what is happening, what are they doing, navigated me to towards design. I learned that it's a thing, it's a real thing. People get paid for it and you can have fun and it looks amazing. And I knew right off the bat that that's what I want to pursue. And so I went to did my bachelor's in India in at Trishti School of Art and Design, and then moved to Vancouver to do my master's at Emily Carr, just design through and through. And it's been a fun journey so far.
That's pretty interesting. Would you say like all of this, uh, kind of the exposure from your family business and everything, kind of really influenced you to start UX, or was it something else?
That's a great question. What really drew me to UX was I think my environment played a big part for sure. I've also always been very curious. Like even as a child, I always just wanted to kind of learn more, right? So I'd buy like encyclopedias and books and do my best to dive into areas that interested me. And so art was one of them. I remember winning competitions in India, like being like the first place in like some art competition in India when I was a kid, and coming back home with these prizes just because I loved it so much. And so looking towards that industry with that curious eye wasn't something that felt that foreign when I was younger. It felt like the next step. But what was cool was introduction to really the tools that were being used back then in the advertising and graphic design industry, like Coral Draw, I remember was on Maya was one. And so being exposed to those tools made me realize, like, oh, hey, you can draw on paper, or I saw my uncle lettering by hand, but now that happens digitally. And so that led me to think about, well, okay, what else happens digitally and why is it happening digitally, right? And just knowing that UX is such a new field, like it only came around in the 90s, when computers became more prominent, computers were a thing, and that technology really boomed. It wasn't something that was around for decades. And so it was very interesting for me as a kid, as a teenager, to start thinking about, like, oh, this discipline exists in print and physical format, but also in the digital space. And then I started again digging in and learning a little bit more. um, what led me specifically again to UX, and a part of that in my environment was also being in the city that I'm from. Ahmedabad, Gujarat is famously known as a place where a lot of people have their own business. It's very much like your family owned businesses, and everyone's got their thing, and everyone's, figuring out how to not make money, but like come up with an idea and run with it, right? And India in itself is, I find personally, bursting with creativity. There's a word that we say, which is Jugaad, right? Like you figure out a creative way to solve a problem, and people were always doing that, whether it was through building a brand or marketing or figuring out how do they run a business. And so as I grew up in this environment that valued businesses, running a business, taking ideas and running with it, being creative, being present in this again world where everything was colorful and beautiful and bold and unique and fun, I was just very much drawn to it, like a moth being drawn to its flame. And so I started digging in. I learned what UX was. I stumbled upon service design when I was 18, and I was like, "Oh, this is beautiful. This is amazing." You can think about all of this from a holistic perspective. Think about what made a human go, "Oh, I think I want this service. Oh, I think this sucks, and I want to like achieve X, Y, Z, right?" And now there's this whole journey or ecosystem that exists that serves this person, right? And so I would say like that is what finally led me to UX. That's what made me realize something like this exists. I can be a part of it. I can learn how to do it. I can hone some skills and yeah, go from there.
That sounds really interesting. And I think I still want to kind of preface a little more here and kind of dig more deeper. What do you think, kind of few things, maybe few key takeaways that you took from that experience while you were seeing your family business around this space, the businesses in Ahmedabad? Which kind of few those key takeaways which you feel you still use or you have used
Mhm.
throughout your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing I think it's really more of is an attitude than a skill. Maybe it's a skill. I guess it's debatable, but it really is that idea of Jugaad, which is um, right. Like first, I think the first part of that Jugaad philosophy is there is a problem. That problem exists. You learn how to understand why this problem exists, right? Your curiosity probes you, and you're like, well, what is going on? Why is this not working? And then pushing that to the next step and saying, well, I'm actually going to solve this. Resources are not, money or not, you name it or not, I'm going to get creative and figure out how to solve this problem. I'm going to figure out how do I fix this, or really just approach this, right? Not even from that fixing perspective, it's really just approaching. And so I think that's something that has definitely stuck with me over the years. There's another thing that also kind of stuck with me, and I'm pretty sure my dad said this to me very early on. I remember he was working on a client project. He was trying to come up with a logo, and I sat down and I started asking him, well, who is this client? What do they do? Why do they have this product? Who's buying this product? And really started doing a little bit of research of my own. And I came up with, I started sketching, and I roughly understood what logos were, and I started coming up with designs that I thought visually represented this idea that we were trying to communicate through this company. And I loved it, and my dad hated it, and he was like, no, I don't think this is it. And I was really upset, and he said, well, you can't get attached to your ideas. The moment you get attached to your ideas, you're never going to move on because you think of them as your own. And that's something that I definitely carry with me to this day. And I will tell people whenever I meet them, like, don't get attached to your ideas. The more you stay attached to your ideas because they're your own, or because you love them, or because they're beautiful, you'll never push yourself. You'll never think beyond this first phase that you're at, and you'll never grow.
No, I think it's a very great insight. I think this is very similar to kind of an analogy that if you are at a job that you are comfortable, you can stay there forever, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not the way to go. You have to kind of let go to give space to grow yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is quite interesting analogy of how that works. Very interesting. I think now
Mm-hmm.
let's kind of jump back to how you actually, when you started with the industry, how you came across. I do want to kind of segue that with one question, that is, uh, what kind of led you to think that you wanted to do your masters abroad, and how did that shape your thinking in terms of the industry overall?
Cool. Yeah. My master's. So just to kind of reiterate the question that you just asked me. So what led me to do my master's slash move? And then sorry, I lost the second part of your question.
And kind of let you like what how that kind of shaped your thoughts, or like kind of your vision for the
Mhm.
industry and your future.
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, the thing that led me to do my master's was really just having that clarity right off the bat that I did not want to pursue a career, a design career back home in India. I just staying abreast with the market and the trends, and just kind of seeing how design was as a field, all throughout my undergrad and even before that, and, seeing my dad work and then his competitors kind of be existing in that space, and then how things worked. I got that clarity quite early on that this is not, I don't want to be in India as a designer now, just because it felt like we were 10, 15 years behind in North America. And that also meant that very clearly I could see that UX was not a thing. Like, no one gave a crap. No one knew about it really back home, or they did, but it was very, very, very small. And so in order for me to really pursue this path, I'm gonna have to move. And I wanted to go to North America just because it looked like they were 10, 15 years ahead. And I was like, I think that's the space that I want to be in. So it was a very intentional choice to then think about, okay, what are my next steps? What do I want to do? Masters made sense to me because I wanted to now take all of this knowledge that I'd acquired and channel it into pursuing my next degree, like learn a little bit more, push my skills. So really, like, again, there's a big focus on research methodologies. I had a fantastic instructor at Emily Carr who helped me really shape my skills there. But also, again, really sort of get this warm welcome into the industry through my master's. And so I moved here to Vancouver, which is where I am now. I went to Emily Carr, pursued my master's in interdisciplinary design, and followed, really brought this project that I had in mind to life. But I wouldn't necessarily say that doing a master's shaped my ideas or my career trajectory at all. I think it was just sort of this milestone that I see that I went through, which was different than like traditional education. You really focus on the thesis. It's very self-directed learning. So I think if anything, it showed me the importance of committing to projects, but also being very much self-directed, having a schedule, like taking ownership and autonomy of the things that I was doing, following through, thinking about how it's going to progress over 2 years, like having that sort of longer term vision, and then breaking it down into semester by semester to really drive that progress myself. So it really was sort of learning more of that, and then applying those skills obviously later, but less so, like it didn't really make me see the industry in a different way. I think it just equipped me with a lot of these sort of real life skills that you need to to have, right, like to own your own path and make it happen. And if you don't, you're just going to fail, and you have to like do another year of your program and sit in school.
No, that sounds really interesting, and I think that is a good perspective towards this. How you kind of did your kind of realized it so early that uh, obviously at that time it was like the industry is there's a gap between like 15 years from North America to India, and you want to cover that sooner. And I think that's definitely something a lot of people did, not just in UX and like software engineering. A lot of folks like quite
Mhm.
early, where they kind of moved to kind of get that early edge in that technology,
Mhm.
which is quite new, before it kind of gets saturated with a lot of designers, which is happening right now. But quite interested. So I think now you have kind of a good chunk of experience. You have worked with amazing companies like Lululemon, Verify, ThinkFic, and more. Uh, how would you say you adapt kind of a design approach when you kind of move between these companies, around like some are consumer focused, some are enterprise focused, different, and obviously everybody has different goals. How you kind of
Mhm.
adapt your design approach to that?
That's a great question. I think one thing that I've learned over the years by, shifting, not only moving between companies, but also different industries. So like you said, like I've been in e-commerce, retail, ed tech, which is education tech, mining, healthcare, you name it. And again, that was a very intentional choice to go into these different industries. One thing that I've definitely learned out of it, which is also kind of a challenge, is to unlearn everything that you learn in one space, in one industry, in one vertical, and then almost just sort of start afresh in a way when you go into a new industry. So moving from Thinkific, which was ed tech, education focused, still a tech company, to um, Foundation, which is more of a commerce, but for wholesalers and distributors. There are, of course, a lot of learnings I'll bring over in terms of UX, how, the methodologies and skill sets that I'm working, that I'm applying there that I can now bring over here. But there is a lot of that unlearning that you do in the sense that I'm not going to learn that, oh, okay, I understand that people who use Thinkific have this level of technology friendliness that is obviously going to apply to this e-commerce industry. Absolutely not. Where is that assumption coming from, right? So I think a big part of it is taking that moment to pause and realize, well, great. I learned this here, which applied to this industry, to this market, to these users, to this specific company. A lot of that might not apply here, and that's okay. Because now I get to start again, and now I get to see this new industry from a fresh lens.
Very interesting. And do you think, like, I just had a quick follow up. So, do you think with these sometimes, like, how do you validate that? Or do you assume all the time that, like, you have to start over? Or maybe you use some of this which you feel in, like, through your gut that can be
Mhm.
useful here. You try it out, and if it does work out, you kind of continue on it.
Yeah, I think I would urge you to, I would urge anyone who's kind of moving from that one space to another, one company to another, to take that moment to actually pause and reflect on what did you actually learn in your space A. What were those learnings like? What areas did they apply in? Did you learn something new about the industry? Did you learn something new about the market? Did you learn something about how certain components in the market are now shifting? Let's say new technologies emerging, like maybe AR or VR are becoming a thing, and now you're starting to notice trends not only in this specific industry that you were just in, that you now foresee are going to apply to this next industry that you're going in, right? So I think taking that moment to pause and reflect on what did you actually learn in space A? What level does it apply on? And then now, as you go into space B, taking that time to evaluate and learn more about this industry, this market, this company, this competitor, the people who are in this space and why will help you connect those dots. At the end of the day, I think it really is all about, you can learn a lot. You can gain a lot of knowledge today from a lot of different sources. And we've got tools at our fingertips that allow us to do that, right? Like we've got ChatGPT, but we've literally got a wealth of data on the internet. What's important is how do you connect those dots? And I think reflection is so important there, because knowledge is power, but knowing how to use that knowledge is truly key. And that will help you transfer the right learnings to a new space. And so when I say you will unlearn a lot, there will be a lot of stuff that you're not going to be able to apply, and that's completely okay, but you will just have a fresher perspective on how, let's say, AI that was working in a certain way in the education space absolutely is not there yet in the e-commerce wholesale distributor space. They are 20 years far, 20 years out from adopting AI, maybe, right? So yeah, pause, reflect, think about what layers it goes on.
Very interesting. I think kind of what I get from it is uh, what you said. Like you gotta pause, see what worked in that industry. Let's say out of 100%, 90% of those may not go kind of work directly. You just pick it up and copy paste. You and those even those 10% will not be like copy and paste. You would have to
Mhm.
add or remove certain things to
100%.
kind of mold it for however you want to use it or however that future may
Yep.
look like for that industry. It's pretty good. I think that that is a great way for, and I think I also agree with this, that a lot of times when we put that bias that this is going to work and we continue on it, we continue on a wrong path for a quite a long time and we waste a lot of time, efforts, and
Totally.
everything. So I'd say, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think pretty great, pretty great. I think kind of takeaway to kind of reflect and kind of look back on what,
Hmm.
how, what can kind of work around the other industries. Okay, I just want to
Yeah.
kind of segue now to one of your experiences that you've had. I know that you're at Verify and a lot of other places that you worked in a lot of end-to-end kind of experiences for a lot of great products. What what challenges or insights do you think were from designing for like these industries?
Designing, would you mean just in general, like approaching design in these industries when thinking about those end-to-end experiences or any specific
Yes,
part of the process? Okay. I think sorry, actually, I'm just gonna pause for a second. So I just want a little bit more clarity on that question. So just in general, like what is designing like and doing end-to-end stuff for a lot of different industries, right? Right. Okay, so
yes,
kind of on the broader level. Okay. Yeah, again, I think on a very similar note, based on what we were just talking about, when you come into a new industry, and again, maybe this is an actionable thing that you can do, right? Like when you go into a new space, which is try to understand where you're at. So kind of just maybe think of it as like you just flew from Canada to Spain. You do not speak Spanish. You've never been to Spain. Again, pause, think about where am I? What am I doing here? What language do they speak? What is the culture like? How do people like to, meet together? What environment around me exists, right? So I think first and foremost, starting at that level of understanding what industry am I in? Who is in this industry and why? What kind of services, products, things exist? So again, taking that like step back to think about that broader ecosystem that exists in that industry is so helpful. So you might like, let's say, think about ed tech. Like let's chat about ed tech, which is education tech, right? So education, what has education been like? Maybe schools come to mind, traditional schooling comes to mind, right? So you're thinking of like a brick and mortar school, kids go in, they've got desks, maybe they wear uniforms, you've got teachers, right? Like you kind of immediately think about these layers. Now, when you add that layer of technology, all of a sudden you're thinking about, well, okay, what does education mixed with technology look like? So you might still be thinking about, okay, it's brick and mortar. Maybe we're looking at adding smart boards and tools and things are a little bit easier for teachers, things are a little bit easier for students. Now we add another environmental complexity like COVID. Now what happens? Now no one's there, there is no physicality, no one's meeting in person. Now what happens to the industry of education, right? So I think examining those industries, those verticals from that broader, holistic, end to end, really not end to end, really that holistic perspective is so helpful before you even dive in and think about just making a wireframe or coming up with solutions or something. Because if you don't understand where you're at and why you might be doing something, you might start designing the wrong solution for the wrong people that maybe don't need it, right? So I think, again, when I do a lot of that end to end work, I'm immediately thinking about the space that I'm in. Why are things happening? Who is it for? Why is this important? What are some of the trends in the spaces? what are the shifts that are happening now? What are the shifts that happened 5 years ago? What are the shifts that are coming 5 years from now? I think that helps you a lot as a designer when you're looking at the end-to-end journey, because you start thinking about people and how they're navigating through not only this service or this app that you're now going to be designing for, but also like them navigating through, again, this industry, like maybe education, right? Like, what is education, this online education looking like today? What was it like in 2021? What was it like in 2019? Very different, right?
I think definitely something interesting. I think one thing I did realize while you were talking about that step, as you add more steps, technically you are thinking of the constraints that can that may change your thinking towards how you are designing for that product, right?
Mhm.
And obviously that those are an important part of it, because constraints can change the way you are going to design, change the way you're going to think about things. And sometimes maybe you come up across edge cases which you
Mhm.
have never ever thought of in life, right? But
Mhm.
that's a really interesting perspective. So the next question I do have is more on your focus around kind of building scalable experiences with like a data driven and kind of a system thinking approach. What does this mean in practice, and how
Mhm.
do you kind of apply these principles to like the real world product design?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just again building onto what we've been chatting about, kind of examining those layers in that broader sense. Now, when we look at it in that practical sense, we're actually designing things. It gets really interesting, because um, you really start thinking about what resources do you have at hand, right? To begin with, you might start thinking about data that you have access to, whether it is, how did we get to know our users? Did we do any interviews? Do we have any qualitative insights that we can use to build an understanding of who we're designing for, all the way to looking at real raw data, in terms of quantitative tools, or in terms of tools like, let's say, Power BI or Amplitude or whatever that gives you analytics, and numbers, right? That you can again start interpreting to understand how are people using the tools and services. So I think right off the bat, when you start thinking about like that data drivenness, that's where you kind of maybe you start looking into, you start thinking about, what do I have access today that tells me about who I'm going to be designing for, which is really important. I think something that we often start with as designers, right? Like one thing that we all love doing, I hope everyone loves doing this, which is the design part, which is the fun stuff. Like, we all have ideas. We want to think about cool solutions. We want to make cool UI. We want to make it look amazing, which is great. But it's also important to think about like who is going to be at the end of this, right? Who's going to see all of my cool concepts and why? And so that's what I think is what you end up doing. You start investigating, you start looking at what do we already know that about our users, and how do we start using it. And then again, as you start zooming out a little bit, right, from that 5 foot and staring at my screen to now I'm a little bit more zoomed out, you might start thinking about, well, what else is my user really using? Sure, they're using our app. What else do they use to full to fix this pain that they might have, or to achieve this goal that they actually now have at hand, right? So you might realize, oh, they actually use Microsoft Word a lot, or they're using some other tools quite a bit, yeah, in addition to the tool that we offer to complete this bigger goal that they have. So as you start zooming out, and as you start probing, and as you start using critical thinking to understand why is this happening, or what is happening, and how is it happening, and what are the other touch points, you start building an understanding of, again, this ecosystem that they're in. So I think, again, in practice, you can sort of think of it as zooming out slowly or zooming in slowly to build a good understanding of who this is for. Why are we doing this? Where does this tool, product, feature, button that I'm designing being used? And again, why and how and when? And then you really start building on top of that, right? And I think that's really important, because if you don't start zooming out and think about the broader system that this human is in, you might sometimes just miss the point of the design, because no one ever uses a service or a product or a screen or an app in isolation, right? There's so many other things at play that go hand in hand. So it's important to zoom out and think about all these different aspects.
Very interesting. I think really great takeaway on this is like how you said, uh, if you just focus on one specific thing, you wanna do think about what you said, like a broader vision, which may be affecting that smaller thing in
Mm,
different ways, which you would not have thought about. Definitely something creative. I do remember yesterday I went to a design event and I did a workshop around object driven design. It was
mm,
just a new way to think
mhm.
of how systems work in a
Yeah,
broader vision.
yeah.
And that was really interesting.
Mhm,
Being an engineer, I have seen how object oriented programming works, and it was very in a similar
mhm.
way, but more on how is the system working to help you
Mhm.
make the design and the flows, to make sure you don't miss out and make sure you
Yeah,
have that broader vision of how the overall
yeah,
product works uh,
yeah.
before you actually jump into specifics.
Actually, one really good example comes to mind when you think about, again, maybe like even, when I say like on my LinkedIn, like, oh, I do like systems-based thinking. I want to park my jargon for a second. But really, when you start thinking about that end-to-end experience, or really when you start thinking about design, think of it as when you go to a restaurant and you want to have a meal, right? You go in, you pick up the menu, and then you think about, okay, I'm going to order a tiramisu and I'm going to order a pasta dish. Now, you are in the front of the restaurant, you interact with a server, maybe someone who's checking you in, someone who's taking your order. Maybe you can see the kitchen, maybe you can't. But you place that order, your server takes that order back, and now there's a entire back of the kitchen that you are never exposed to. Maybe you can see it, but maybe you can't. But they have their own system of bringing your dish to life. There's another system behind the chefs who are actually working on your dish, bringing it to life. There's a whole other system of where are we sourcing our ingredients from? Where do the tomatoes come from? Who made the pasta, right? You're looking at resourcing, you're looking at, again, more and more and more layers that you may or may not see, that you may or may not interact with. And that's kind of what design is like in a nutshell. You might just be touching upon the menu that a customer is going to pick up and read, but there's so much more that goes into bringing this one pasta dish that a customer is going to order, right? That you may or may not be a part of. And that's, I think, a good way to look at systems, or that's a good way to kind of look at that end to end design. What is this whole ecosystem? Where is that tomato coming from, and how is it becoming a pasta dish? And who is coming to eat this? And how should the menu look, right? Like as you start exploring and unraveling that problem, you start asking more and more questions, and you dig into that ecosystem. And that's the beauty of design.
Interesting. I think definitely a great take on this, and I think definitely easy way to understand the whole experience. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but you may also want to think of pizza or something else as well, not
Yeah,
just pasta. Yeah,
totally.
but yeah, but definitely something like a crazy kind of how you want to look at the whole experience, just as a layman term, because I think design patterns do come a lot from general behaviors,
Yes.
uh,
Yeah, absolutely.
which people miss out on, uh,
Hmm.
and that is really interesting. Awesome. So kind
Yeah.
of let me kind of take off from here to a different segue. Around what happened with you recently. I know you got laid off recently, like 4 months ago, and then
Hmm.
again you secured a role at Lululemon. Like I know that layoffs are really tough, and a lot of folks who would be listening may have gone through it or going through it. How did you navigate through that period? And what would you kind of advise to people who are going through that they should look up when they're hunting for a job?
Yeah, great question. Layoffs are inevitable. They are happening. The industry, I find, is definitely in a bit of a slump, in the sense that it's slow. One thing that hasn't shifted from 10 years ago, 8 years ago, when I was looking for jobs, is that companies do always want to hire someone who's senior, someone who's already done the early bits and have gained a bit of experience and are there. So that's probably going to persist, and that's okay. That doesn't mean you have to. And I do want to preface this: like, don't feel like you have to rush behind titles and then you run to like get that title so you can get a job. No, because there are some things that you have to experience and you have to do that. You have to like work on projects to gain that experience and to gain that knowledge of what worked and what didn't work. And that's something that will automatically put you in a better position as you learn more about yourself, the kind of work that you want to do, and ultimately the kind of job that you want to get. So don't let that bum you out if you are only seeing certain kind of jobs over others, or if you come across a layoff. It sucks. There's no way around it. The way I see it is something that I've always been very mindful of or cognizant of now more than ever, especially after going through a layoff or just kind of realizing that okay, you're cut off and now you need to move on. Is to not attach my self-worth or my identity with my job, which is very important. I love what I do. I love what I do. I see myself doing this until I die. Or maybe not. Maybe there'll come a point where I'll move on to a different space. That's okay. But that doesn't mean that I need to let this bring me down or need to see it as a failure. I think it's okay if you get laid off. It doesn't mean you suck. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you did something wrong. It's just beyond your control. And the best that you can do, or the best that I tried to do, is move on, accept it for what it was, and recognize that I need to look ahead, not look behind me, and then move forward. So the first few things that I truly did was, after I felt like I was like, oh, okay, this sucks. I don't want to be here. Is started to think about, what do I want next? I did see it as a really, really beautiful silver lining that, again, I was forced to be in this space where I need to pause and think about what matters to me. What is my priority? And, that's something that I didn't know I could afford or not afford, but I didn't want to pause and dwell too much on that. I wanted to just take that moment and think about, what am I looking for next? I use that time to build my intention, in the sense that, and again, reflect on, what have I enjoyed doing so far in my journey as a designer? What are the parts of design that excite me? What is the kind of role that I would like to be in? No titles, no companies, no industries aside, but really, what is the kind of work that I want to do next? Where are my skills at? And what skills do I need to polish? What skills do I want to push? What skills do I want to hone? And so based on that, I had a really good understanding of the kind of role that I wanted to look for. I wanted to continue focusing on strategic design. I wanted to continue focusing on being in an environment that enabled me to think about systems more holistically, end-to-end experiences more holistically, be that rounded product designer that I could be, help bring products to life, whether it was through 0 to 1 efforts where nothing exists in the space, it's ambiguous. Come in, let's figure this shit out. That excites me, right? Like, I love doing that, and there's so much to learn. And so I realized, okay, that's the kind of environment I want to be in. And it also gave me the opportunity to think about other priorities that matter to me, like good culture, good folks to work with, a work environment where learning, curiosity, growth are encouraged, and that you're allowed to make mistakes, because at the end of the day, making mistakes is what helps you grow, right? You are never going to get anything right. You're never going to, just make the right choices every time. But if you're in an environment that allows you to fail and recognizes that it's human to fail, and that that's how you keep growing and you keep learning and you're supportive of one another, I believe that makes a world of a difference. And so it was a great opportunity for me to think about my priorities, what I wanted next, and intentionally look for my next role. And so that's what I did. I started organizing my priorities. I created a Notion board. I started uh, diving into companies that were hiring and companies that weren't. I took the time to maintain a repository of my job search, just so that I can track things, but also be very intentional as I apply and think about, how well does it align with my priorities. What are some of the things that I would get to learn at company A versus company B, and think about it again from a career trajectory, career pathway perspective. And lastly, I took the time to continue fostering connections on LinkedIn. I can't stress enough about the power of being visible, no matter the channel of your choice. But you can be the greatest designer, greatest human, but if no one knows you, no one has heard from you, no one has ever stumbled across you, your work, your thinking, your anything, it's gonna be hard for them to say, I want to hire you or I want to chat with you, right? So I think it's important to be present and to share and not, again, not be afraid. Just start from sharing and be visible.
No, I think definitely a lot of points from the what you just said. Definitely something that stands out to me is, and also we live in a era now where attention is the biggest asset that you can own,
Mhm.
that you can grab basically, and uh, I think that's why you want to be visible, you want to be known, not like you want to be like Brad Pitt, but you want to be someone
Yeah.
that if somebody asks you, or somebody can know your work, like see your work outside, and like you have enough credibility to prove that. So that's pretty interesting. I do want to have more specific question around this. So what would you say if somebody's just starting out and kind of looking for jobs in this kind of place where it's really hard,
Mm.
uh, and definitely you apply to thousands of jobs and you don't reap the
Yeah.
rewards sooner?
Yeah.
It takes a long time. So what would you say they should kind of do, other than what you just said, kind of obviously grab attention and stuff, in
Mhm.
terms of the core skills to
Mhm.
kind of actually stand out and maybe increase their chances?
Yeah, absolutely. I think whether if especially if you're starting out, I think it's really, really important to work on real things, real client projects, just projects. Get creative, use your Jugaad mind, like I say, and think about how can you actually start getting real life client projects. And that doesn't mean you have to work for free and like sign your life away. Don't do that. But also think about what is your priority, right? Like start assessing where you're at. If you were to assess yourself as an external candidate that you were potentially hiring, what would you look for? You want to see, does this is first of all, is this a real human? Yes, no. Does this person have a resume that I can look at? Is the resume clear? Do I understand what kind of work they've done, what kind of experience they have, where they went to school? Do you have a portfolio? Is that portfolio, again, clear, polished, gives me an understanding of what kind of work that you've done, and helps me understand that if I hire Abhay, I can see that Abhay has a really strong skill set in UI design, and Abhay has worked primarily in ABC Industries. I understand where Abhay might fit in my company, right? Like, will someone get that sense when they look at these touch points that you offer them, which is your resume, LinkedIn profile, portfolio, and any other stuff, any other like pieces that you may have there. So I would start there, start thinking about that. Another thing that I bet like folks have heard this a lot, which is tailor your resume, tailor your portfolio. But I think really what that really is about is taking the time to understand what kind of an environment would you be putting yourself in. Now, what does that mean? That really just means, who is this company? Where are they at in the market? What does their product do today? What problems is their product solving? And based on where this company's at, why might they be actually filling up this design role? What are some of the things that they're trying to achieve? Are they trying to find someone who's going to help them see this broader vision of, hey, where is our company going to be in a year from now when we've fully integrated with AI? Or is this company in a space where they've just found the golden goose idea and they need someone to bring it to life, right? So if you don't understand that, you're going to be giving the wrong solution to the wrong user, or the right, and that doesn't work. You might have the best portfolio out there, but if a company who's looking for someone to help them lift them off the ground so that they can now visualize this idea into an app, present it in front of users and get feedback once, but you don't have any of that experience, or you just don't have any of that UI skills that they might actually be looking for early on, then they're not going to hire you. And so I think really that's where it's at, like taking the time to think about where are you applying, where are they at, and then tailoring your pieces accordingly. Did I miss anything, Abhay, from your question?
No, I think you covered it all, but I think I do have a specific questions around this
Mhm,
again. So, uh, let's say somebody is trying to apply for a job, uh, let's say the roles that the experience that they have limits them to apply to only very
mhm,
limited amount of jobs, and they want to increase that.
mhm.
How would you? And obviously, it's very difficult without getting a job to get to a different industry. How would
Of
you
course.
say they can do that, or show that they have either the interest or experience? Like how they can do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one thing that I've definitely noticed in companies, just in like the past 2 years and the hiring trends, is that one is that with COVID, when everything went remote, and that meant that, like, not only can you now look for designers in Vancouver who can come into your office, but you can look at designers in Calgary and Ottawa and Manitoba, but also the entire United States and maybe other companies, right? Other countries, right? So the first thing is that that pool got so much bigger. Pool of candidates is so much bigger, and that means that you have a much bigger supply of designers that companies now have access to. And so that means that if a company is specifically looking for someone who has experience in the retail industry doing the lifting projects in the ambiguous space where nothing exists, and we now want that first iteration of our app and service, but and someone's done that for 3 years or for three companies or three different industries, if they're looking for that, the fact is that they're actually going to look hard to match those criterion first because they have access to a bigger pool of candidates, right? So sometimes you just can't do anything about it because you don't have it, and they are going to find it in a different candidate, and that's just the reality of it, and that's okay. If we kind of again look at it from the perspective of just gaining more experience in certain industries because they interest you or that's where you want to go, let's say gaming, right? Very niche. You want to go into gaming. Um, I would again urge you to start thinking about how might you actually get more experience there. So could I look at a gaming app if I was interested in mobile game app design versus console? Could I start looking at that? Could I start taking those pieces apart? Could I start thinking about how was it designed? Why did they do certain things? What kind of tools, platforms did they use? What kind of technology comes in? What does that ecosystem of a company look like who's designing a mobile app? And then start honing my skills there. I think that's again important because when companies hire, they do want someone who's maybe familiar in that space because often companies don't have the time to onboard folks, right? So doing a lot of that legwork yourself is going to definitely give you a bit of that edge in the sense that you're going to be familiar, you're going to understand the potential challenges, right? So part of that might be connecting with people on LinkedIn or through friends of like people who've worked in the gaming industry, asking them questions. How do they work? Who do they work with? What do they do? What do projects look like? To build that understanding in the forefront. So again, kind of doing a bit of that legwork to understand where you might be, what kind of challenges might you be looking at, and what kind of work do you expect. B, seeing if you can actually start working on some projects on your own, whether they're self-initiated or let's say they were for a small business or a small client, maybe it's in the e-com space. So you're thinking about, oh, can I build someone's Shopify website, and start thinking about how might they now enable different sales channels from Shopify to XYZ, right? And do a little bit of that work at a lower rate just so that I can, or whatever rate that you want, doesn't matter, your choice, but start picking up some of that work, get creative in how you find it. I think is going to help you, and then see taking the time to demonstrate that. One important thing that I will say, though, again, as someone who has been a part of hiring committees who've helped, we've like in two different companies I helped hire for design roles. It's easy to tell when someone maybe is trying to think, place that experience that they gained in a capacity that it wasn't, right? So let's say, let's say I've never worked in, let's say if I'd never worked in gaming, which I have. If I had never worked in gaming, I worked on a project on my own, no client work, and then I start positioning that as client work, that those themes are going to fall apart when you go into an interview. So the best strategy that I find is when people are completely transparent about the work they did, why, how, when, in whatever capacity, and the learnings they had, actually helps them, the company, and the candidate a lot better, because it lays a really good foundation for expectations, and um, just having a sense of like what are some of the skills you're gonna want to build versus not, right? So bring that together in your portfolio, show it for how it is, focus on your reflections, focus on showing that work in the best light, show your thinking, connect the dots, and then talk honestly about it. That's the best you can do, in my opinion.
No, I think definitely a power packed kind of what you told, a bunch of kind of insights here. Uh, and I think definitely what you said about like trying to be honest about your experience is quite natural. And also, I think sometimes doing a bunch of passion projects and showing your like real interest is
Mhm.
more impactful than having a like a
Totally.
client project. I don't know, I feel sometimes that
Yeah,
does help because that does show that you're genuinely interested,
absolutely.
rather than someone who is just getting a job for a paycheck. So
Absolutely. And
yeah.
I've seen sometimes like folks will work on just one, they'll work at one, their first job is at a company for 6 months, and then they'll write that they're a lead designer and apply for lead design positions, right? So you're already, don't think, I never think about it as faking it or like, being dishonest. Like, sure, you might have had that lead title and that's okay, but think of it as where you are setting yourself up for, right? Am I setting myself up for failure if I only have 6 months of design work experience and I now apply for a lead position? Or do I actually want to start from a place where I know I can learn a lot, no matter the title, right? So I think it ultimately comes down to, how do I want to set up myself? Do I want to set up myself for success in its rawest form, where I am, again, whether I share it with someone or not, where I understand where I am at as a designer, where are my skills at, which areas do I need to grow in, and why, what is my path like, and then position myself accordingly so I can learn and grow in these specific areas that I wish to. Or do I want to just kind of position myself for the sake of positioning because I think an employer wants to hear something from me? Because the chances are that employer is gonna see that mismatch right away, right? And that doesn't help either you or them. So take that time to think about where you're at, what do you want to do, where you want to grow your skills, and then position yourself accordingly. And that's truly the best you can do for yourself, because you grow in the areas that you want to intentionally.
Totally agreed. I think just to summarize, I think being self-aware is quite important. uh,
100%.
you want to make sure that you can write whatever, but
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you are doing it intentionally, and you know that
Mhm.
this may like make other person feel. And I think another point, I think want to connect it to another point which you said, is look at your portfolio profile in general from the person who is going to hire you perspective, that
Definitely.
how they see it, they might see it, they might look at things, and how they might interpret what you have written.
Mhm.
Maybe you wrote lead designer, but they see only like a general junior designer. We don't know. So you want to be like
Mhm.
honest with that, and that is, I think that is what I
Totally.
wanted to just kind of summarize and connect with. Also,
Mhm.
so like kind of I want to segue here towards kind of a research question around it, just like a fun one. So obviously you have amazing experience in user research, interviews, usability, and more stuff. I do want to ask, what's kind of one of the surprising insight from user that has kind of changed the course of the overall project that you were working on?
Mhm. I think in general something that you might that I stumbled upon quite a bit early on in my career when I was learning to connect the dots and learning to apply different research methodologies was that often I would go in with, as we all do, often go in with certain assumptions in place and then test, let's say, either test for usability, test a concept, or like broadly try to decouple the program with people. But very early on, I remember that something that kept surprising me for like my first couple projects was how I would like leave those usability sessions, or really just sometimes it's just these broader research sessions, just thinking, that's not what I thought was going to happen. And it would just be such a big mismatch of expectations. And I realized that what was happening was I was going into these research opportunities with my users, again, whether it was usability or sort of like that broader concept study that as our concept testing that we would do, is that I would go in with assumptions that I wasn't necessarily aware of, that I was operating my approach, my concept, my design on certain assumptions. And that was like the leg of the project, the leg in the life of the project. And so leaving those sessions so surprised made me realize that I need to keep my assumptions in check, and I need to actually write them down in my research plan and be so aware of it, even as I build up those concepts, just so that I am, again, solving for the right person, solving for the right problem, approaching it in a way that makes sense for the user based on what they're trying to do. And I think that was the biggest learning that I had very early on, which is to keep your assumptions in check. Because if you start to build on concepts based on the wrong foundation, or just a foundation that's just either mismatched or wrong, or just completely off the left field, you're just going to run down the wrong path, waste your time, waste your users' time, waste the company's time, and then you're going to have to start all over again.
No, definitely. I think that is kind of an interesting take on this. So awesome. So the next question I have, kind of the second last question I kind of want to ask in the podcast. So many designers nowadays kind of really struggle to articulate kind of the impact of their work,
Mhm.
whether that sometimes it can be due to company transparency constraints, sometimes it can be that the
Mhm.
work was kind of a volunteer work or a passion project. How would you say they should measure the success of their design beyond just what they have like made aesthetically?
Love that. I think especially for projects where either the company is just slow, so things that are out of your control, right? Like company's slow, they don't have analytics stuff in place, maybe they can't measure data at all, or you did a passion project and there is no real there are data points, so there's no sort of real like these data points that we expect from projects at like a proper company, right? Like you might be like, oh, our adoption rate was like 20% up, or our revenue was like 10x, blah blah blah. I would start those projects with, again, that with a clear intention of what do I want to achieve, um, and what are some of the areas where I do want to make a difference based on my understanding of the space, the problem, the app, or the service. When you start from that, when you really start from that front, you are clearly thinking about, and you have more clarity on what you're trying to achieve in a certain project, whether it's a client project, passion project, company project, you name it. If you know that you're going in not just thinking, oh, I'm just going to redesign this onboarding and just make it look cool, which is completely fine. Do it if that's your focus. If you want to push your UI skills, you want to be on, let's say, a platform like Dribble and really get a role that helps you hone in that on that skill set. Do it, 100% do it, but know that that's exactly what you're doing, and then focus on making sure that the UI is out of this world. If you do want to show your impact in other ways, again, think about what else are you trying to solve for, why, and how might that show up. So you might not have data at the end of the day to show that, oh, our adoption increased by 20%. But you could try and be scrappy and still interview people before and after, and think about how might I actually try and validate that the solution or the approach that I came up with does solve a problem. And that itself showcases that you as a designer are thinking beyond just as UI or just like this cute, like this beautiful, like polished wireframe that you're coming up with, right? And that's what matters. So even as that hiring manager who might be looking at, like, let's say, Abhay only has a passion project that I can look at. Abhay hasn't had an opportunity yet to work on real life projects. That's okay. But I love that he actually paused and thought about, oh, he wants to solve for users not having access to doing returns more smoothly on certain e-com apps. And he actually spoke to a couple people before to understand their pain points. He shaped his approach. He did his little process. He came up with a couple solutions, and he actually closed that loop and went back and came up with a couple more qualitative insights here that show me that he's moving in the right direction. I love that because it doesn't limit your impact or doesn't like stop you from showing that impact, but it just showcases your intention so much more clearly, which is again something that companies will look for when they look for those early stage designers. How are you thinking about the problem? How do you start working on projects? Do you have clarity on what you're trying to achieve and why? And then how do you show that again? How do you present that in a project to me?
Very, very interesting. I think few kind of summarize. So one thing I understood, you want to show that you are solving a problem there and how you solved it. Okay.
It could be an
So
opportunity, which is also
yeah,
totally okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine. And second thing I understood, which is very interesting, you did not say it exactly, but I think I understood this is what you meant, is like show having that Jugaad mindset, showing that you are smart enough to figure out ways to achieve something. Let's just say that for now. Let's, for
Hmm.
example, when you gave an example of uh, if you did a project where you could not find the impact, you can do the jugaad of interviewing, let's say, five folks before it and five
Hmm.
folks after it, and maybe figure out how you can make it a quantifiable impact,
Totally.
rather than saying I don't have any impact. So I think again it's an
Hmm.
effort, and you wanna
Yeah.
be, as I said, you wanna be jugadu to figure out how you can do that. I still remember I did
Yes.
that for one of my recent projects because I was doing a research project, and like I can't tell them let's have mixed panel in our platform. I just
Hmm.
can't. Like
Yeah.
it's not
It's
something they
not
will do.
feasible. That's
Yeah.
okay.
So
Yeah.
I did the same thing. I very interestingly, I just had to tell how the user interaction increased with the redesign I did, and it was
Hmm.
very clear. I just and the issue was our users are old people. So
Hmm.
what, and it was very easy. We did we did a testing before that, and I just
Yeah.
calculated the number of clicks they did, or kind of the questions they asked while
Hmm.
the testing. I use that to numerically make a value of how much the user interaction actually got increased,
Hmm.
and like
Hmm.
quantifying the time they spend and some. So I kind
Yeah.
of did that, and I think that is really interesting. Again, you did not say it exactly, but I think this is what the person can take away.
Yeah. Be scrappy. Be resourceful. Show me that you tried. Show yourself that you tried. And when I say me, I'm talking about like the hiring manager, someone who's looking at your
Yeah,
portfolio and who's assessing like, do I want to interview this person? Be scrappy, be resourceful. Don't be afraid to think outside of that box of, like, what might that impact show up like, right? Like it might just be that one or two interviews that you do, and that's enough to give you an indicator that this is moving in the right direction, and that's good. Because more often than not, no matter what scale of a company you're in, being resourceful is a skill that is always going to be valued,
yeah.
because you want to work with people who know how to not only, again, connect those dots, but find their way. I don't think Um, I I I doubt this exists anywhere where you have someone who is holding your hand and guiding you through the journey of life, of design, through your career, through your progress, nothing, right? You are the one who's gonna guide yourself through it. So learn how to be resourceful, learn how to get creative, scrappy, jugadu, whatever you want to call it in whatever language, but learn how to be resourceful, learn how to make things happen and show your intention. And that's again, that's the best you can do to set yourself up for success. It really is that intention matters so much more because it gives me, again, as an interview, an insight into how does Abhay think about problem solving? What does design mean to Abhay? It goes beyond just showing me wireframes, right? Like it shows me that Abhay wanted to see how did that design change before and after he approached it. And that's cool. That's awesome. It's okay you didn't have mixed panel. It's completely, it would be mad if you got mixed panel for like that kind of a project where it wasn't feasible to be probably maybe not even right for that scale of the company, right? So yeah, think about like what makes sense in that moment and then find a way to showcase that value.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay. Kind of, I'm gonna end the podcast with a last question.
Mhm.
Generally ask this with everyone. Uh, Seeing the industry kind of really hard for people who are kind of starting out, or who have just got into the industry and still figuring out their ways, what would you kind of say a one piece of advice other than Jugaadu, because I feel that has been kind of constant across the podcast, but maybe other than being Jugaadu, what would you say one piece of advice you would want to kind of instill in them while they are kind of looking to get into the industry or just starting in the industry?
Yeah. Um, Gain all the knowledge that you can. Try to expand your horizon. A lovely coworker of mine uses this analogy, and I'm gonna borrow it here, which is think of it as being in a game. I bet like many of you have maybe played Age of Empires, Civilization, really anything. You're in a map, you see the map, you're in this little building, and then there are clouds all around your building. It doesn't mean the world around your little world that's visible on the map doesn't exist. It just means you need to go out and explore it so you start seeing it on the map. And that's what you need to do in that early stage. The more you learn, the more you go out, the more you expose yourself to ideas of design, ideas of art, different industries, ways of working, how people approach design, what is AI, what's coming up next. The more you'll have an understanding of where is this industry going. From my personal experience, I can tell you that helped me leaps and bounds when I was starting out. I still do that. I still try to stay abreast with what's going on everywhere, and that gives me an insight into where I might want to go next. But do that, try to gain that knowledge, try to open up your perspective, try to explore outside of your little zone in the map, and see what else is in these clouds, what exists, what excites you, what doesn't excite you. Talk to people, listen to them, get their perspective, and see where you want to start moving. And truly, that is the best you can do when you start out in your career, other than working on your portfolio and gathering projects and whatnot, because this is really what's going to give you an understanding of, does this excite me, does this not excite me? It's okay if it doesn't. What part of it doesn't excite me? And which parts excite me and why? And then it's going to help you figure out your path, because that is ultimately how you're going to start progressing. You're going to start building skills. You're going to start seeing gaps. You're going to start seeing naturally drifting towards certain areas versus others. And it's going to help you move in certain directions, right? So the more you expose yourself, the more you try, the more you learn, the more you fail, the more exposed your map's going to be in, and the further you're going to able to be. Yeah.
No, 110%. I think definitely very actionable advice for people who are kind of out there, kind of explore uh, different areas while you're starting out to figure out maybe you like a specific niche and you want to grow really big in that. So really, really insightful. Awesome. Thanks a lot. That's how we kind of come to the end, and really want to kind of thank you for kind of contributing your time, and I think it is going to be really, really valuable.
I
I
hope
think we got
so.
a bunch of insights. One thing definitely everybody's going to take away is like how to become Jugado for sure.
True.
But there's bunch of kind of analogies we have kind of gotten that, and I think as I said, really appreciate you kind of coming on the podcast. I will link your socials in the description for anybody who want to reach out to
Absolutely.
you for any questions that they may have. Again, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast, and
Thanks,
thanks for
Abhay.
everybody who's listening.
Thank you, Abhay. Thanks for your time. And I hope this was helpful. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll do my best to get back to you and good luck.